So, hello again. And this is a short presentation, and I'm going to present the chapter titled "Detecting Gender Gaps" from the handbook. This session is a structure for the next following part. Let me. So the components of this session is first, we'll briefly introduce the chapter aims. Then we'll look at the methodological approach, focus on choosing the right statistical test based on the type of variable. We'll walk through examples using categorical and continuous variables. And finally, we close with the importance of this approach. And some comments or questions if we have time. So, in this chapter, we provide a practical guide to identify gender inequalities. And for this, we use the GEAM questionnaire, for employees in this part. It focuses on the bivariate analysis to detect differences between women and men in the workplaces. The statistical tools are introduced to help determine whether observed differences are real or only due to the chance. So that is the aims of this chapter. So this table shows how to select the correct statistical test depending on the type of variable and the number of groups. Here you can see the dependent variable, and the independent variable depends on the research question. And this is the bivariate analysis, no? So for the categorical variables, if we are comparing two groups with small samples, use Fisher exact test. With larger tables, the chi-square test is appropriate, and the Kramer's V can be used to assess the effect size. So here is just a summary with categorical variable like type of contract or job position. We can explore the gender gaps. And for the continuous variables, or for continuous outcomes across two groups, we can use a t-test. For 3 or more groups, we can choose an ANOVA. For example, in the GEAM, we have the flexible work skill. So it's a continuous variable. And here to analyze the gender gap between the woman and men about this skill, we can use the student t-test, but we have another dependent variable that is not the gender, that has 2 groups. We can use the ANOVA. For another continuous outcome, like job satisfaction, that is another scale that we have in the GEAM. And if we can introduce more factors, not only the gender, but with another factor like the education level, we can use the ANOVA, factorial ANOVA. So that is a summary that the manual has in this chapter. So this is an example of the first part of the chapter, the gender and categorical variables. A sample of question, for example, if we want to explore about do men and women differ in their distribution across job position, we can use contingency tables, stacked bar chart, chi-square test, Fisher exact test, or the Kramer's V to explore this research question. In the chapter, we use 2 variables to analyze the gender gaps, like job position or type of contract. And here you can say the outputs of this kind of analysis with GEAM data, with categorical variables. and just with a bivariate analysis. With another analysis about the gender and continuous variable, such as perception of flexible working or job satisfaction, we apply different statistical tools. Here, for example, we can have a research question like, are there gender difference in reported levels of workplace flexibility? So to answer this question, we can use the student t-test for comparing groups means, or ANOVA for multiple group comparison when we explore more factors about it. And the variable explored in the manual are flexible work scale, job satisfaction, and others. So you can expand this kind of analysis with your own data and your own research question. That is a basic analysis for the first gender gap research. So why this approach is useful, is important, because it helps to detect gender inequality, but supported with statistical evidence. It's not only to the chance. It also informs organizational decision-making and equity initiatives, and provides a foundation for more advanced multivariate analysis. And that is all for my part, because now, thank you so much. So we can go to the next part with Anna, longitudinal comparison. That is another chapter of the manual.
Will you share the presentation, Dalia?
Yeah, sure.
Can you see that? It's should be fine. Mm-hmm. It's fine. It's on your screen.
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
Sure. Let me know. Here.
Okay, thank you, Dalia. Thank you, Jörg, and I'm delighted to be here today to present on behalf of all the authors of this chapter the results of a comparative analysis on gender equality at one of the research institutes in Poland. And I would like to briefly overview our findings and highlight some practical implications of the GEAM data. So next slide, please. The main goal of our study was to explore how the perceptions of gender equality have evolved at our institute. And I may add that the National Information Processing Institute in Poland specializes in data collection related to higher education and science, and we also develop IT systems for both sectors, and we can we also support decision makers in shaping data-driven policies. So we hire both researchers and IT specialists. We use the GEAM tool to assess workplace culture, gender equality practices, and employees' experiences. And the study was conducted twice, first in 2020 and then again in 2024. The context is important because, as we know, the COVID pandemic brought about major shifts in how we work, especially with the adoption of remote work and hybrid work. And what is important, during this time, our institute also grew significantly from 400 to 500 employees. And we also introduced our very first gender equality plan and appointed a gender equality officer. As for our research process, next slide, please. We distributed these online questionnaires to all employees in our institute. In 2020, we received responses from 152 persons, and 63 of them completed the entire questionnaire. And last year, participation increased. We had 308 respondents, with 180 completing the full survey. Next slide, please. For the analysis presented for the purposes of this chapter, we focused on 5 dependent variables, which Jörg introduced earlier. So I would like to mention that we examined work culture. Second, we looked into masculinity contest culture. We explored the presence of microaggressions. The next area is equality practices. And finally, we analyzed how resources and responsibilities are distributed between genders. And by focusing on these 5 dimensions, we wanted to gain a comprehensive picture of gender dynamics within our organization. Next slide, please. As for independent variables, we took into account several demographic variables. It's gender, parental status, that is whether someone is a parent of or legal guardian of children under 18 or not, and managerial status, comparing managers with non-managers. For the data analysis itself, we used mean analysis to track trends over time, and we calculated average scores for each group. And in addition, we conducted a regression analysis to examine how the dependent variables were influenced by both time and the categorical factors considered by us. Okay, now let's turn to the key findings. And one of the most notable results was the clear improvement in overall work culture and perceptions of equality. Actually, we see that between both years, employees reported a positive shift. We observed the increase in the number of employees who positively evaluate gender equality. In 2024, more respondents reported a favorable perception, and it might reflect some recognition of the institute's efforts to promote equality. At the same time, our studies showed that despite the introduction of equality-focused initiatives, employees' views on the dominance of male norms in the workplace remained largely unchanged. And one of the more encouraging findings was a decrease in reported microaggressions, but we realized that this may be partly due to the shift to remote work. And it could reduce face-to-face interactions and influence microaggressions. So we find this trend promising, but it's crucial to continue monitoring these issues over time. And as you can see in the visual, perception gaps still exist. Women tend to rate workplace equality lower than men. Managers generally evaluate the work environment more positively, and interestingly, parental status has only a minimal influence on how equality is perceived. So when assessing gender dynamics, we see the need to consider multiple factors. Okay, next slide, please. And of course, we are also aware of the limitations of our study, and I want to thank Dalia again for your support on this topic. And one of the main challenges is the cross-sectional nature of data. We know that it captures responses at specific points in time rather than following the same people over the years. So maybe the changes we observe might reflect differences between groups rather than true progress. Second, our analysis may miss some underlying factors that affect perceptions, like department-specific cultures or some individual experiences, and this could potentially bias our conclusions. And finally, the statistical models we used often assume that factors like this gender, managerial position, and being a parent have the same effects on all respondents, and in reality they might affect different groups in different ways, and it depends on the roles or career stages or something like that, for instance. And in our chapter, we propose some solutions to address these limitations, like using synthetic cohorts or conducting longitudinal studies that allow to track the same respondents over time, including more contextual variables, and performing some group analysis. So I encourage you to read this in the chapter. And some conclusions. In summary, the perception of gender equality at our institute has improved over this period analyzed, but persistent differences related to gender and managerial status remind that we need continuous effort to address these gaps. We believe that the GEAM survey is an important tool for long-term monitoring. Thanks to that, we were able to gain deeper insights into gender disparities and design some targeted interventions. By committing or planning some regular assessments, we can continue building a workplace culture that supports equality for everyone. And some practical implications on the final slide. You can see how the GEAM survey can serve as a vital tool for tracking the progress of gender equality initiatives within academic and research institutions. Through regular assessments, organizations can identify both improvements and ongoing challenges, and ensure that our policies remain effective over time. The GEAM data helps pinpoint some specific areas where disparities persist and allow to develop targeted actions. And finally, by providing comparative data, we are able to empower craft evidence-based recommendations that support change. So that's all from my side, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Aina. And we will go to the next part of the chapter of the handbook. Let me share my screen again. Great. So, well, the next chapter is called Comparing Organization. And this is a continuous part of the chapter 3 and the chapter 4 with comparing in time. So at least the same contents of this presentation, and a brief introduction about the chapter, what is the comparative framework, the importance, and some questions that we have time. So in this chapter, we want to introduce an approach to analyze the gender gaps, but across faculties, departments, or organizations. In the chapter, we are comparing organizations. So with it, we want to support the identification of inequalities, institutional strengths, and evidence-based interventions. So we build on GEM survey data to inform gender equality planning. So what is the parts of this chapter? The comparative framework consists of 6 stages, each building on the previous one. It begins with preparing and harmonizing the data, then moves through the descriptive analysis, after the statistical testing, and finally to interpretation and reporting. And it has about 6 stages to do that. Today we will focus on the stage 1, which has already been developed in detail, and briefly introduce the stage 2, where work is currently underway. So in short, well, the stage 1 is about building a clean and reliable base from which all other analysis can be developed. So here in this stage, we have merge the data from multiple organizations after the harmonize some variables that if we need, handle with missing data, how to detect with this, and what decision we can take about the missing data, and how to construct some key variables and indices that are not in the draft data with GEAM. So we can construct some indices like I mentioned before, flexible work scale, or another job satisfaction scale, or something like that. So that is the general aims with this stage. Has one database with the multiple organization or multiple departments or units, depends on the research of analysis and the availability of the data that the institution has. Well, for the second stage, the descriptive analysis, is like just generate a profile about the organization or maybe about the department of the one of multiple departments of the one institution. So here we want to describe the characteristics of each organization and just have a profile about the organization. And here we can use visual tools like bar charts, percentage, means, cross tabulation, and we are focused on identifying patterns before applying statistical tests. So this is only a descriptive analysis, and we generate a profile for each organization. So for this chapter, what comes next? In the stage 3, we will use bivariate tests like chi-square, t-test, ANOVA to examine difference across organization, like in the chapter 3. And for the stage 4, we'll introduce a just test comparison using interaction and control variables, a little more complex and multivariate analysis, not only bivariate. And finally, with the results, will be visualized and consolidate in a summary table to support reporting and action. So here is an example what want to produce after this analysis, a kind of summary table to compare different findings. For example, here we have the job satisfaction in different organizations, and about if there are a gender gap observed, and it is significant, not significant, or about percentage with the experience of harassment, and another kind of analysis for comparing organization, departments, or units in one institution. And why is this important, useful? Because cross-organizational comparison reveals how workplace conditions shape gender inequalities. And here we can find differences in work-life balance, job satisfaction, organizational climate, discrimination. And also we can take good practices that may be transferred across faculties, department, or organization. So that is the overview of the chapter 5 that is in process 2. And thank you, and that's for my part.
Okay, so one more to go. Can you share the screen?
Sure.
So we have now basically, the first 3 chapters. Well, there's actually one chapter that we didn't talk about, which is about just summarizing your respondents. Basically, that's also a chapter you might have seen online. So detecting gaps, that's a common task that you want to do when you start analyzing your GEAM data, to see just, how do inequalities spell out across different sociodemographic groups. We thought, one other thing, since we have now several organizations that did run the GEAM twice, is, you want to compare the results from the first round and the second round of the GEAM, using it for monitoring the effectiveness of when you implement your policies. One could be, since there are more than 50 organizations now across Europe that have done the GEAM, compare how your organization fares compared to another one. So this is what Dalia just presented. And we also now included one additional chapter on how to run an intersectional analysis with the MAIHDA approach. So if you go to the next chapter, because from the outset, to the next slide, please, Dalia. From the outside, the GEAM, as you have seen, collects a whole range of different socio-demographic data, so gender identity, sexual orientation, age, class, educational background, which you can then use to understand better, how these dimensions might overlap and relate to a specific outcome of interest, like job satisfaction or experiences of microaggression. And for that, we made a first step at adapting this multi-level analysis of individual heterogeneity and discriminatory accuracy approach, the MAIHDA approach. Impossible to pronounce, really, but which is sort of becoming, like they say, a new gold standard for doing these intersectional analysis, because it goes beyond the limitations of when you run a normal regression, with interaction terms. And you can see, basically, if you find our chapter not as useful, I mean, there are now an increasing amount of other chapters that are tutorials, basically, on how to run those analysis and examine in relation to health inequalities, mental health, eating disorders, or also educational outcomes. So the last reference you see here is uses PISA data, for example, to analyze intersectional effects in educational outcomes. So overall, it's a quite interesting approach that we thought might be also applied to the GEAM data. If you go to the next slide, please. Just very briefly, a word about intersectionality. So I think it's really important to understand that intersectional, it's not just about, combining these 2 or 3 different socio-demographic variables in a new analytical approach, but you really need to get at the core of the issue, which are the power relations in your organizations and how these might shape, different experiences of inclusion, oppression, but also advantages of privilege and advantage in your organization. And for that, if you go to the next slide, it's really important, sort of to match up main dimension of intersectionality, which you see on the left side. It's about deconstructing, redrawing categorical boundaries that then map onto a certain element of your data collection. So this is about self-identification to avoid othering when people respond to your questionnaire. It's about power. So this relates directly to the purpose of your data collection. So when you do a GEAM, this should be informed by really understanding and having talked to, the employees or students in your organization to understand already from the outside a little bit better what are the main issues that we want to address and what is the data that we need to address these. This also relates to context and participation. So intersectionality is really about the geographic and historic context where these power relations operate. And this is what you need to understand by talking to the people inside your organization and involving them from the very outset. So it's not just, so to speak, the MAIHDA approach is a last step. Once you have done all that and you have your data, you also want an analytical framework that allows you to understand better how multiple dimensions then really interact and affect a certain outcome. Okay, next slide, please. As I said, the MAIHDA approach is described like a new gold standard for studying intersectional inequalities. It's not the only framework that's out there for doing intersectional analysis. There are others, but it's becoming quite prominent. And without going too much into the details, I just want to focus on 2 or 3 main ideas that doesn't make it look so difficult in the end. So the main ideas behind this approach. It's a multi-level model where basically individuals, employees, students in your organization are understood to reside on a first level, and then they are part of a second level, so the multi-level, which are intersectional strata. And I will show you how this works and how it looks like in a slide. As I said, it overcomes the limitations of traditional regression interaction-based modeling, where often the number of categories you can combine were problematic and really made it difficult to interpret your results. This is really, I think, much easier in this model. And to give you an example, in this tutorial by Evans and Leckie in this publication, they generated 384 intersectional strata. So by combining 2 categories for gender, 3 for race, ethnicity, 4 educational categories, 4 for income, and 4 for age, you get 384 intersectional strata, and you want to understand, which of these combinations is really affecting more severely a certain outcome than others. Okay, next slide, please. For the GEAM, we tried this out with GEAM data. So we had 635 full responses from the Brescia City Administration, which we thought we could try out with this GEAM data. And we constructed here 12 intersectional strata. So 2 for gender, 2 for disability, and we constructed 3 age categories, junior, middle, and senior employees. And then you see on the left, how the respondents, the number of respondents are distributed across these different groups of people that you see. And we examined then how does this affect, are certain groups here more affected by the microaggression scores. So the microaggression score it's 11-item measurement scale, for example, asking about if colleagues have prejudices about my intelligence and abilities, for example, and people then get to score the answer there from never to often or frequently that you experience this type of experience in your organization. And when we go to the next slide, you can see basically a MAIHDA approach is like it constructs two models, the so-called null model and then the main effects model. And the null model, which only has an intercept, tells you something about how much of the variance of your microaggressions really happens at this group level. So how much of the microaggression score is explained by these groups that we have just constructed. But since these groups also include the main effects model, so in our case it's gender, disability, and age, you need to separate this out, and this is done in the main effects model, which then shows how much of this variance is really part to someone being having a disability or permanent health issue, being a woman or a man, and so on and so forth. And it spells out these two elements with these two measurement scores, the variance partition coefficient, the VPC, as you see here, ECC score, and then the proportional change in variance. And yeah, you can read up on this on a little bit the more in-depth explanation in the chapter. And I think the big advantage of this approach then, which is important to see, is you can then rank a predictive model on how much the different strata, again you see them here, a woman has a disability and is a junior, younger than 39 years of age, how these rank comparatively one to the other. So as you can see, the first 6 entries here, basically the higher the microaggression score, all are related to disability, which was also indicated by the main effects model. If you remember, there was a significant effect for disability, but then it also is in combination with gender and age. So it gives you a quite good overview on how these intersectional strata really relate to your outcome of interest. And you can this also visualize, as you see on the right hand, the stratum rank in relation to the predicted microaggression score. And if you remember that others use like 384 strata, these types of visualizations and tables then make it really feasible at all to have a better look at this intersectional effects. Also, I would say usually already in this, we had 632 respondents, which is like for 12 strata, it was really like the lower limit, even though MAIHDA lets you deal better with these relatively low samples, small samples, sorry. Still, you need quite substantive response rates in order to carry out this analysis. So I guess it would be more effective if you really run such an analysis on a student survey, where you can expect, where there are thousands of responses, and then you can carry out this type of analysis, which actually was also done. If you want to look at the UNICEF project, they've run this type of analysis on sexual violence in universities and students. So this was much more better in this sense. Okay, that's it, I think. Yeah, okay.